moderator of our English session, Mr Rajdeep Sardesai, to come on stage. Please welcome you with a round of applause.
Please welcome David Richardson is CEO of Population Crisis in the United Kingdom. Poonam Muttreja is Executive Director, Population Foundation of India. Alistair Currie is Head of Campaigns and Communications, Population Matters United Kingdom. Nandita Bajaj is from the Population Balance in the United States. Give them a very big hand, ladies and gentlemen. Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this India Today special at the International Conference on Sustainability Education being brought together in partnership with Mobius Foundation that is driving these issues of climate change, of sustainability and population dynamics. The issues really of a 21st century universe. In this special that we have, we're going to place women in focus in relation to these issues of our time. Because remember, in the face of the global climate crisis that the world faces, we are presented with an undeniable truth. The need to address the interconnected challenges in a way of climate action, of sustainability, and population dynamics. Our discussions today will emphasize the pivotal role that women and children in particular will play in driving change, because it is only by empowering at least 50% of the population that you can pave the way for a sustainable and just future for all. We're joined on this special by a very distinguished panel, and therefore you would argue have limited agency when it comes to family planning in particular. How do you then empower women so that women become really the driving force in ensuring population stabilization?
When J.R.D. Tata started Population Foundation of India, founded it, the whole focus was not population control ever. It was, which is 52 years ago, it was development. And as you know, Mrs. Gandhi did say in the UN in 1972, development is the best pill for population stabilization and for empowering women. And I work on family planning, reproductive rights, reproductive choice, because I do believe that the most concrete way to empower a woman is for her to have a right on her body, her life, her freedom to make decisions. And the first begins with her education. If we invest in women's education, it's not just family planning. It is about giving a woman opportunities, at least opening opportunities. And education, again, has been known to be the best contraceptive. Second, when a girl gets married, and if she gets married, and if she does get married when she has a child, and if she chooses to have a child. So in the book, what has happened is that there's been a rural-urban north-south divide, where in the south, where in the southern part of India, where we invested in good governance, health, better governance of health, education, and therefore people have better opportunities. We did better on not just fertility, but we did better on many other ways. And empowering women in a society, especially in rural areas, where the social norms dictate and the very regressive patriarchal social norms dictate the life of a woman, it is very important that we first question those social norms. Early marriage, sex selection, anti-female bias, investing more in sons, wanting to have more sons, and therefore you have endless number of children which you don't wish to have. If women had opportunities to decide, they would be deciding very well differently. And it's time we accepted that women and girls, even in the rural areas, Rajdeep, have different aspirations. It's thanks to media, internet, and so on. So we have to accept that if we don't work on changing social norms and empowering women, they will do it themselves and force us to.
And what you're saying is education is the key. And at that in the day, and then that reflects, as you said, in the divide between southern India or the southern states and many of the states of northern India, although the gap is slowly but surely reducing there. David, you've been at the forefront of addressing notions of population dynamics and sustainability. How do you see the intersection between climate action and gender equality? It's one thing, as we're talking, we need to empower our women. What will that do in the larger fight on ensuring climate action?
Thank you. I had to think about this question very, very carefully and very long. I'll put them in order of priority. I think the impact of climate change, gender inequality, or equality to said, is firstly vulnerability and impact. I was looking at a film the other day on water in the it was called the water crisis in the Rajasthan district region. And the women there sometimes make 4 journeys a day to the well with 20 litre pots. Anybody from 5 years old up to 90-year-olds. Obviously, in rural India, in these parts, climate change will have a tremendous effect on them. Therefore, women are particularly vulnerable in India and in developing countries. The second thing, obviously, I'm going to put in and reassess again, education. Empowering women is terribly important. They need education because that delays marriage. That will give them opportunities of learning. That will give them the opportunities of getting better jobs and participating more. And this gets me on to the next answer, which I would say participation and leadership. You only have to look at Greta Thunberg, the Swedish activist, to know that women are incredibly better communicators than me sitting here, and would get her point across in no time at all. I think women have been kept out of technical innovation. Therefore, they will play a major part if they can be educated in what they call the STEM technologies: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. They've got very creative minds. Obviously, another thing that's terribly important: climate change, intersection of climate change and gender inequality is the right to health care and reproductive rights. You definitely need access to family planning everywhere in India, and I believe this is not happening yet. And I would add to that, one thing that's not in many people's mind: you don't have access to internet in all the villages, which seems quite extraordinary in this day and age, where you've landed people on the moon, you're going to land people on the moon, and got a space on the moon, you haven't had internet there. And this has got to happen if you're going to have a breakthrough in gender inequality and having people, women, participating in the society. And then finally, policy and advocacy. Women are much better at dealing with other in leadership and community development and getting the feeling of climate change across. After all, you educate a woman, you educate the whole family.
While we focus on women, Alistair, you've been advocating for a sustainable global population. How do you persuade people, and I refer here to men and women now, on climate change and sustainability? Probably even more difficult at times in societies like ours, where there are still sharp gender inequalities. But how would you go about to that? Where do you start?
It is a very challenging issue. When I first took this job 6 years ago, I saw the job advertised and I thought, well, that's a no-brainer. Of course, if you have more people, that's going to have an impact on sustainability or poverty, on all sorts of areas. And I was very surprised when I actually took on the job to find that people were resistant to that message. And I think it falls into a number of areas. The first is just understanding. Intuitively, people do understand that. But actually, if you move just even a little bit higher up into the often environmental movement, into policymakers, there isn't as much understanding as we might expect. One example which I constantly give is that the IPCC, in its latest report on mitigation of climate change, said that the two strongest drivers of climate change, of emissions through fossil fuel use, are GDP per capita and population growth. I go and visit and talk to people who are very highly informed on climate issues on a regular basis. Almost none of them know that the IPCC said that. And one reason for that is that it didn't make it into the summary for policymakers, which someone was talking about earlier on. You have to read 1,000 pages in order to find that piece of information. So at that policy level, there is a lack of understanding, not across the board. I think if you look at, for instance, UNEP or some other UN agencies that clearly make the association, but it often isn't recognized at policy level. And then another, I think, very important thing at personal level and at a policy level is discomfort with this subject. And in many ways, it's justified discomfort. There is particularly conscious speaking in India, that there is a very dark history of population control, and that people should be suspicious of it. They should be conscious of all the risks that go along with it. But I think we should also recognize that everything we've been talking about here, about education, about female empowerment, about addressing, tackling poverty, we know that gender inequality is the strongest driver, strongest correlate with unwanted pregnancies, for instance. So the recipe for addressing population is a positive recipe that we should feel proud to advocate for. But the word population often suggests something which is more contentious. But the reality is that if we're not talking honestly about the challenges, we're not going to solve our problems honestly.
Nandita Bajaj joins me from the United States. She works with population balance. Nandita, you've written many articles on how population denialism, this is a term you've used, is harming the most marginalized communities and accelerating our ecological and social crises. Can you briefly explain what you mean by population denialism?
So population denialism, it's an ideology, partly Alistair referred to it a bit, that says that population growth does not have any or much impact on the environment or on the people, and that therefore there's no need to talk about it, there's no need to address it. And there are a couple of reasons why population denialism exists, and one of it is actually what Mr. Bervin started out with, your conversation, is a lack of ecological education, such that people do not understand that our planet is finite and that we are in a state of extreme ecological overshoot. We're consuming 75% more than the Earth can provide sustainably, which means we're actually stealing from the future. We're stealing from our children and from our grandchildren and taking away an opportunity for them to have a good life. We have seen in recent news that 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries have been crossed. Of course, climate crisis is one of them. The biodiversity loss and the extinction crisis, where we are losing species at 100 to 1,000 times faster than pre-human times. We're seeing resource scarcity, especially dwindling freshwater supplies, where over a couple of billion people are living in water-stressed countries today. And nearly 5 billion people will be living in water-stressed countries by 2050. So, we're seeing crises like the refugee crisis. So over 1 billion people are going to be displaced from their homes, from their countries because of the climate crisis. And as my panelists have mentioned, it's the most marginalized communities that are impacted the most, people who have had the least to do, for example, with the crisis. Alistair mentioned the dark history of population control that has also made people suspicious about talking about population, like China's one-child policy, like the sterilization campaign in India. But a lot of people don't know the dozens of amazing, incredible policies that have actually lifted people out of poverty, increased gender equality, and enabled people, women and men alike, to make better choices for themselves. So, those are, I'd say, two of the most contentious issues around why population denialism exists. And I can speak to some others as we go on in our conversation.
Will that really give women the strength you believe? Is legislation the way forward, or is it, as you kept saying, education, education, education?
So I have no evidence from the world, not just in India, that coercive populations, population policies or programs or coercion of any kind, including incentives and disincentives, work. The Cairo Conference on Population and Development in 1994, 189 countries signed the Cairo plan of action, where they said we will not follow incentives and disincentives. And the two countries that did follow incentives, disincentives, and some form of coercion in the past are India and China, the two most populous countries in the world. What does that say about them? Second, the amount of energy we spend on diverting the debates on coercion. I want to say that incentives, I want to give a good example. India has a meager budget of 1.7%, and within that, it has a meager budget of 4% on family planning. It's gone to 6% now. 6% of the family planning budget, we did a budget analysis, we spend on incentives for sterilization. 85% of this 0.4%. We spend 4% on tackling methods in a population which is growing because we have a population momentum, a large young population who doesn't need sterilization. And the other amazing thing, let me tell you how misguided our policies and programs have been, is that 77% of the women who experience sterilization have never experienced family planning before they went through sterilization. No temporary method. What were they doing? They were going for abortions. India has close to 16 million abortions according to government data in 2050. It's much more. People don't always acknowledge. So it doesn't make any sense from any point of view. And finally, individuals should have to be seen as a resource and not to be controlled. Once they come, what do? We are not going to throw them in the sea. And I want to end by quoting the World Population UNFPA report. When the world reached 8 billion, they said 8 billion possibilities. Once people are born, we have to see them as a resource, invest in them, and stop spending time on getting diverted. And China finally had to do away with the one-child norm. They had 2-child, now they have 3-child norm, and they have a disaster where they have aging population. They have a declining working young population. They are not going to have people they get working or a young working force population. And finally, look at the sex ratios in China. They are much worse than India, and that's what coercion is.
Okay, so we're pretty clear. Coercion is not the way forward. I've got a very little time, but I want to get each of you to respond to a specific question. Alistair, to you, how do you see the balance between addressing overpopulation and respecting individuals' reproductive rights and choices? As Poonam has pointed out very clearly, coercion is not the answer. So what is the answer? And how do you address that balance between overpopulation but respect an individual's right? I want to have 3-4 children. That's my right.
I think it is. It clearly is. And I think, if I may just brandish this report, as we were talking earlier on, people think about China and India, but in fact, this report, the Population Map has produced, is looking at those exemplary policies that have been adopted in other places, which...
Give me an example.
That's Thailand, for instance, Rwanda. I think very few people would think of Rwanda as a place which has got a a very strong population policy in which they're very clear. They say this is not about controlling people. This is about empowering people. This is the approach that Rwanda has taken. And it is following a very simple recipe. If you empower women, if you tackle poverty, if you give people access to contraception, which still at the moment there is an unmet need of 250 million women in the world have an unmet need for contraception. If you give education, we know again that education is one of the key drivers that will bring down fertility rates naturally. Yes, I do believe it is also important to give people advice about what the implications of a large family are, or a larger family. I think that particularly applies in high impact countries such as the one I come from, where the environmental impact, the carbon footprint of a single individual will be multiple times that someone in India or elsewhere.
David, is the glass increasingly half full? Is the world increasingly recognizing the need to control population?
I'm sure people are recognizing we got control population, but humans by nature are very stubborn. We have a very deep-seated belief in our own reproductive behavior. I come from a five-child family. I don't, but if I did, that I want to have my children. That's often the case that happens. Reproduction. Therefore, changing habits is very, very difficult. Another thing is, I've asked many people about their country. Do you think it's always India, always somewhere else, always China? It's never the UK. Some of them are those populated countries in the world. Absolutely ridiculous. But the answer is, there are lots of green fields around. The fact is, they don't accept it. And I think the fundamental reason was why I hosted the first World Optimum Population Congress back in 1993 was because scientists haven't developed a sufficient robust model of population. What was a sustainable population? And Paul Ehrlich came up with a figure about 2 or 3 billion for the Earth. Right. And that's actually recently a reasonable level. Now we're 8 billion. And the Earth has been changing climate since then, since the 1960s. And we know it. So population, the anthropogenic effect is here. So it's very slow. And one reason we haven't developed it, now there is now a model we can use. Massive work in Merkel and William Johnson of the ecological footprint you've all heard of now have developed this model. And governments could use that to define not only their own sustainability, but criticize the own size of population. We should do this everywhere. And it's not being done, it's done by very few small countries, but not the larger countries.
Do you want to explain that model very quickly?
Oh, yes. Well, it's basically ins and outs. Well, it's very difficult to do with our diagram, but basically it's called biocapacity and footprint. You've all heard of the footprint, what you consume. They've got to equal. Basically, scientists have managed to evaluate all our ins, all what we basically consume every day, the whole in every country, since 1962, and they've shown that we now consume more than than the Earth can produce by about 1.73. In other words, it would take 1.73 Earth to produce 1 year's worth of ecological footprint. That clearly puts it. And I think this is a very major breakthrough because we now have a way of evaluating, everybody can evaluate if they're over-consuming or not. And as it happens, 90% of the Earth is, and we're going to increasingly consume as we need an increasingly more consumable society. So, yes, I expect there to be, it to speed up the decrease in population as people become aware. And it's education, internet, communication. That's what will do it.
A final word then, Nandita. As you've written extensively on these issues, what would be a final message that you would have that you see as a solution? If I were to ask you if there was a magic bullet out there, where would you start?
So since we are speaking about population and the word control has come up a few times, I'd like to start by saying that the key to population stabilization and reduction is to remove control, patriarchal control that is currently preventing girls and women from making authentic and liberated reproductive choices for themselves, whether that includes, like Poonam said earlier, not having any children or having smaller families, because we know that the number of children that women and couples end up having it matches the norm within that society. So if a country, the norm is 7 children, then you ask a woman how many children she wants, she will say 7 because she wants to belong in the community. And when she desires, if she says she desires fewer children or no children, there are punishments in place, such as divorce or domestic violence or social isolation. So I would say the first thing we need to do is remove population denialism, but then also countries like the US, which is the richest country in the world, needs to triple its family planning support from the current 600 million to 1.7 billion in order to meet the unmet need that women have in countries around the world. 250 million women currently cannot access family planning and reproductive health care. And so that would be the first thing, an immediate thing. A rich country that spends $700 billion on its military budget to just give $1.7 billion to empowering women around the world to be able to make authentic and liberated choices.
I think that last data point that you just gave summarizes the state of the world. If we're going to spend that much on defense and that little on family planning, it tells a lot about the world in which we live and the long road that we still have, in a way, to put these issues of gender, climate action and sustainability on the policy makers' top of the mind. I appreciate all my guests joining me. Thank you very much. We don't have time for audience questions today, but we'll have, I'm sure, many more such discussions through the course of the conference. Thank you very much, David, Poonam, Alistair, and Nandita there in the UK. Thank you.